pleaded not guilty to federal charges that he lied about being a drug user on an application to buy a gun. He arrived at a federal courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware earlier today. Now, Biden had made a tentative plea agreement with the Justice Department on those gun-related charges, misdemeanor tax evasion charges. But as you may recall, that deal fell apart at the very last minute. Senior investigative correspondent, that's Catherine Herridge, is outside the courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, where Hunter Biden was just arraigned. Catherine, can you tell us what exactly happened today?
Well, Gail, good to be with you. This was an extraordinary scene that unfolded in the courthouse behind me. The son of a sitting president facing felony gun charges. As Hunter Biden entered the courtroom on the second floor, he passed by me. I was no more than about 5 feet away. And there was a sense of nervous energy, a nervous smile, a sense of real apprehension as we headed into the proceeding. It lasted about 20 minutes. The federal judge asked the president's son if he understood the charges, the potential serious penalties, and that he had a right to remain silent. And to each he responded with a strong and soft voice, "Yes, Your Honor." And when it came time to enter the plea, that was done by his attorney, Abby Laurel, who said Mr. Biden pleads not guilty to the 3 charges. Gail, the next date on the calendar is early November, and we're already getting a sense of the defense team's strategy. They indicated to the court that they will file a motion to dismiss, and they are going to question whether one of the charges is constitutional, a charge that would ban a drug user from owning and obtaining a weapon in the United States. What's striking to me is that just 2 months ago, Hunter Biden entered this courthouse with a degree of optimism and a lot of confidence. But as we saw that plea deal collapse and I was inside that courtroom, what we see now is that the chapter is not closing for Hunter Biden or for his family or for his father, the president, Gail.
Yeah, it's clear he did not expect to be here today, but here we are. We know that today's arraignment focused on those gun-related charges. Catherine, do you think it's possible that he could still face the tax charges, too?
Well, based on the court filings from special counsel David Weiss, there is an ongoing investigation, and he's indicated that he could bring tax charges in one of 2 venues, California, where Hunter Biden is living, or in Washington, D.C. That would require the presentation of evidence to grand juries in one or both of those districts. So we're not clear on the timeline, but the special counsel has made clear that that's a real possibility. And during the last hearing in July, when the plea deal fell apart, they also indicated that they were exploring potential violations of foreign lobbying laws, Gail.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. I know we'll have more later today. Senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang joins us now. Weijia, there's a lot going on for the Biden family because today's proceedings come during this impeachment inquiry into the president's alleged involvement in his son's international business dealings. That's a lot. I know it just happened, but is there any comment from the White House yet?
Gail, there isn't, and we do not expect that the White House is going to touch this, and neither will President Biden. And even though you're right, there is this ongoing impeachment inquiry into President Biden, today's proceedings have absolutely nothing to do with that because they are solely focused on gun charges relating to Hunter Biden. There is, however, an ongoing special counsel investigation into Hunter Biden's business dealings, and those taxes will likely be part of that conversation. And that is one reason why, Gail, that the president, the White House, wants to continue to maintain this distance between the Department of Justice, which insists the White House has nothing to do with any of its investigations. Because, of course, Gail, as we have been covering, parallel to all of this are a host of investigations and indictments into the former president, Donald Trump. And President Biden does not want anyone to even speculate there might be any political motivation for that, which is why he will not talk about his son's proceedings either. But suffice it to say, Gil, you're right. There's a lot going on here. And the White House, when they did talk about this yesterday, today's proceedings said that this is a personal matter and wouldn't have more to say. Gail.
All right. We are all paying attention on this. Thank you, Weijia. Thank you very much. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and on the evening news with Norah O'Donnell. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Gail King here in New York.
So here we are, continuing to follow the breaking news this morning that President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has pleaded not guilty to federal gun charges. He arrived at a federal courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware earlier today, and he left just a short time later. Biden was indicted by a grand jury last month after a judge threw out a plea deal that would have spared him any jail time. So right back with us now is CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. And, you know, that plea deal, he was going to plead guilty to one gun charge. When that deal fell apart, now he finds himself facing two gun charges, which makes me wonder whether or not he could be facing additional tax charges as well.
Pardon me, that's a great question. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why his team has to have really wanted that plea deal, because it was the best way for him to avoid any time in prison. And it was the best way for him to avoid additional charges. All of the charges with respect to the gun charges kind of focus on the same event. One is lying on a federal form, one is lying to a firearms dealer, and one is actually possessing a gun for 11 days when he shouldn't have under the current law. When it comes to the charges related to tax evasion, I think you're exactly right to point out that the plea deal was fairly confined. It included a number of different years. And at this point, once the plea deal explodes, and this is part of the reason it exploded in the courtroom, is because then anything else is on the table. And as we just heard in the special report, it's not just tax evasion, it's also potentially any actions related to Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. And so Hunter Biden, by being part of a plea deal that disintegrated, is subject to a lot more legal exposure than he was last time he walked into that courtroom.
And I should just clarify, I said two gun charges. It's actually three. Misspoke.
Let's bring in CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. She's at the courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, to join this conversation with Jessica Levinson. So, Catherine, you were there in the courtroom. Describe the scene for us and what happens next.
Well, Vlad, this was an extraordinary scene that unfolded in the courthouse behind me, the son of a sitting president facing 3 felony gun charges. As Hunter Biden entered the courtroom, he passed by me not more than 5 feet away, and there was a sense of this kind of nervous energy, a nervous smile, and some apprehension as he took his seat at the defense table. A lot of this proceeding was very routine. The judge described or summarized the charges that he faces, also the penalties, that he has the right to remain silent. And to each of those questions, the president's son responded in a soft but strong voice, "Yes, Your Honor." When it became time to enter the plea to the charges, that was actually done by his attorney, Abby Lowell, who said Mr. Biden pleads not guilty to the 3 charges. What's striking to me is that it was just 2 months ago when I was inside that courtroom, sitting not 20 feet from the president's son, when this plea agreement that included a diversion agreement that would avoid a formal prosecution on the gun charge collapsed. And at that hearing, it had began with this great sense of optimism and confidence on Hunter Biden's team. But here we are 2 months later, and as Jessica just pointed out, he faces tremendous legal jeopardy, not only on this case, but also on potential tax charges as well.
And certainly, Catherine, one thing that we've seen over the past few weeks or so is Hunter Biden and his attorneys sort of shifting their approach to these legal challenges. They become much more aggressive than they were before. He's suing the IRS, his father's IRS, and they're going to fight these charges.
That's right. What we learned in court today is that there will be a motions deadline November 3rd. But prior to that, his attorney, Abby Lowell, told the court that they intend to seek a motion to dismiss on the grounds that this diversion agreement that was part of the plea agreement that collapsed is, in their view, still valid and still enforceable. The government has a very different position. Number one, they've brought charges in this case. And number two, they argue that that was not a fully executed contract because it was never signed off on by the probation office. I think second, and more importantly, they've indicated that they're going to challenge the constitutionality of this gun charge, that it's wrong to restrict the ability of a drug user to own a weapon in this country, and that's a violation of their constitutional rights. And this is very much a live issue in the courts right now, which I think Jessica may be able to explain further.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm curious about, Jessica, is how we got here. As Emery pointed out earlier, there was an original agreement between prosecutors and Hunter Biden, but Judge Noriega basically sort of stunned both Biden and the prosecutors because she accused both parties. She accused both parties, the prosecutors and Hunter Biden's lawyers, of trying to rubber stamp a deal that she considered legally and constitutionally questionable. What about the deal, which then fell apart like soon after? What about that deal was so constitutionally questionable to Judge Noriega?
Well, Catherine Herridge was in the room with excellent reporting that day, so I will start and then let her fill in any blanks. But essentially what the judge said here is, one, there was this big question of, so does this cover everything? And she's looking at the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice is saying, no, there could be additional charges related to, for instance, Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. That is a huge breakdown in terms of the meeting of the minds of both sides. And as Catherine reported throughout the process, that happened immediately after the plea deal was announced, where the Department of Justice said the investigation is ongoing, and Hunter Biden's team said, we think this is it. The other issue was a question about how the deal was structured. And essentially what the judge was worried about is if the plea deal actually was agreed to and then fell apart, that she was the one taking a more active role, whereas it should have been the prosecutor who would make a decision as to whether or not to move forward if the terms of the plea deal were violated. And that was another problem where she looked at this and she said, this doesn't look typical to me. And I think that was kind of step two of how we saw the disintegration of that agreement.
Jessica, I thought it was really interesting what Catherine brought up about the defense. Basically, even though he's pleading not guilty, it looks like what they're going to be arguing is that the plea deal, the original plea deal, should stand in place. And I wondered about if it presents a particular challenge to a defendant if we already know that he was ready to plead guilty to a charge, and now he's pleading not guilty. And though they're not arguing about his guilt in regards to these gun charges, they may be just focusing on this plea deal.
Right. Well, one thing to remember is if a plea deal falls apart in federal court, there is actually a federal rule of evidence that says that essentially the things you say under oath leading up to the judge potentially blessing that plea deal cannot be used against you. That if you say, yes, I'm going to agree to this, yes, I will agree to this, that can't be later used as an admission in court. Now, of course, we all heard it, and that's different from being used against you in a criminal complaint. But yes, you can't erase the fact that we all knew that Hunter Biden was willing to plead guilty. I will say it absolutely would have been attorney malpractice if after the plea deal fell apart, he didn't then change his tune and say, I'm pleading not guilty. That's exactly what you should do. It's what any other defendant would do. And it's what you need to do to preserve your rights moving forward in the case.
Catherine, you've reported that Hunter Biden has been repeatedly drug tested prior to this hearing. And so the penalties and his rights as a defendant are remaining in place, much as they have over the course of this whole experience. Can you just break that down for our viewers? What is he not able to do?
Okay, the terms that have been set for release after this hearing are almost a carbon copy of what we saw in July. He has to continue to work or seek employment. He has to remain in touch with the probation office in California. He is not allowed to drink alcohol. He is not allowed to take illicit drugs. He's not allowed to own a firearm. He's directed to engage in a rehabilitation program. One of the things that we learned today from the court and from the defense team is that Hunter Biden, they say, has been very cooperative with the probation office out in California, that he has submitted already to drug and alcohol testing on multiple occasions, and he has passed all of those testing marks. So he's got cooperation. He's got the same kind of terms of release that he had last time. If I could just kind of take a step sideways here, because I've gone into my paperwork and I found the section of the diversion agreement, which was so problematic to Judge Mary Ellen Noreika back in July. And it's this section here. It's provision 14. And provision 14 says if there's a breach of this agreement on the felony gun offense, there may be an effort to seek a determination by the government, and the person who's going to be the decider or the adjudicator would be the federal judge here in Washington, D.C. And when Judge Noreika read that element of the diversion agreement, she said essentially hit the brakes and hit pause, because I think that's unconstitutional. My job as part of the judicial branch is to make decisions on sentencing. My job as a judge in the judicial branch is not to decide whether additional charges are merited. That's the job of the executive branch and the Justice Department. So she felt that this agreement was unconstitutional. She also found elements of the structure that were not standard and, in her words, were defective. So in layman's terms, this deal, based on what the judge said, was like a legal hot mess. There were many, many deficiencies in this deal, including constitutional questions.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, Catherine and Jessica, both of you, Catherine with your reporting, Jessica with your legal analysis, help us, but more importantly, our viewers understand exactly what's going on. These are, you know, first-time offenders are generally not, they don't go to jail, but there's so many moving parts here.
It's such a convoluted tale with Hunter Biden that we really do appreciate just the insight and clarity.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, and by the way, he's the son of the President of the United States.
That's why we're talking
That's why we're
about
talking
it.
about
Yeah.
it. Jessica, Catherine, thank you both so much. We appreciate it. All right, we're going to have much more coverage of this story and many others throughout the morning and the afternoon. We're also monitoring developments on Capitol Hill, where we're expecting a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy to be brought up to a vote later today. So stay with us for that.